Welcome to the Academic Woman Amplified podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Mazak, tenured full professor, mom of three, and firm believer that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. There's nothing worse than spending hours and hours on your writing just to have it rejected or criticized by reviewers. It feels horrible. So today on the podcast, I'm going to talk to you all about how you can handle writing criticism in a healthy and positive way, and in a way that really will help you improve your writing. So I'm going to start out by talking about 3 types of feedback that we often get, and then how to actually sit down and respond to feedback when you get a review. And then at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you can disconnect from both praise and criticism in order to get your message out there in the world in a bigger way. So let's start with 3 types of feedback that we often get on our writing. And these are posturing, silencing, and the one we actually want to get, which is constructive criticism. So what I want you to do is when you get feedback, you get critique of your writing, I want you to see if you can identify it as falling into one of these 3 categories: posturing, silencing, and constructive criticism. So let me explain more. So posturing. It should come as no surprise to anyone that there is a lot, and I mean a lot, of posturing in academia. The pressure is always on to sound smart, to respond to other people's work in a way that shows what you've read and where you situate your work in the world. That's not necessarily bad, and it's certainly part of the job, but sometimes that pressure to posture seeps into everything, especially writing criticism. When someone is asked to review your work, either blind or in a published or spoken reaction, sometimes they feel as if they have to show you that they are qualified to review your work. And this results in posturing. Here's how it might look in a written review. All right, so if reviewer number 2, right, the infamous reviewer number 2, suggests that you cite a completely different body of literature than the one your work relies on, that might be the reviewer actually posturing, showing that he or she knows better than you and knows more literature than you. Of course, it might just be that he doesn't know the body of literature that you cited. So that's where the posturing comes in. It shows that he's an expert in some kind of area of literature that you're not. Here's another example. A reviewer calls you out for not citing one very particular article and implies that you can't possibly write scholarship in this field without citing it. Now, maybe the reviewer is an author of that article, but I have a dear friend who this has happened to her for not citing one of her own articles. Okay, so again, this is the reviewer sometimes, trying to show through posturing what they know about the field that you're writing in. Another example of posturing is that the reviewer's criticism does not actually engage with what you wrote, but rather just shows off how much he or she knows about the topic. And so, of course, that's the defining characteristic of posturing. So, but if it seems like the review is not actually engaging with your work, that could totally be posturing. So how do you deal with writing criticism that is really posturing? So my strategy for responding to a reviewer's comments is to make a table that I include in the revision. And it looks like this. When you get a comment such as, "You couldn't possibly not cite blah, blah, blah article in your work," but you disagree, you just explain in the "how I addressed it" column why you didn't address that. So what you want is 2 columns. You can go ahead and copy paste all the reviewer feedback into one column. And then in the other column, the title of that column should be how I addressed it, right? So the first column is reviewer feedback. The second column is how I addressed it. And you might say there, I appreciate reviewer number 2's suggestion to include blah, blah article. However, for blah, blah, blah reasons, I decided not to cite that here. And this identifies posturing for the editor. If the editor decides that they really do want you to cite that article, or they send it back to reviewers and reviewer number 2 holds firm, then you can decide either to do it or not and submit somewhere else. But what this does is it makes the posturing of the reviewers apparent and shows the editor that you are standing up against that. Remember, it's your work and you can decide who to cite. This is not to say that reviewers are always wrong, and more on that a little later in this podcast, but you can hold firm on things when you get writing criticism. I've found that most of the time, if I think somebody's posturing and I push back, I'm not asked to make the changes that were suggested by the posturing disguised as criticism. All right. Now, the second type of feedback that we often get is silencing. So here things get a little different. I add this type of criticism because I experienced it in some of my publication. It's similar to posturing, but while posturing is not meant to block your publication, in fact, it doesn't usually engage very much with your work at all, silencing grasps at any little problem with your work with the end goal to prevent its publication. So I'm going to tell you my story as an example. After Hurricane Maria, I published my opinion of the role of university in times of devastation in the commentary section of the Chronicle of Higher Ed, and we'll link that article up in the show notes. Now, the Chronicle is not a peer-reviewed journal, of course, but this just goes to show that every time we publish something, we put ourselves out there and make ourselves open to critique. So after my article got lots of great feedback and sharing on social media, I was contacted by the editor, and she informed me that one of my colleagues, yes, someone at my own university, wrote to her insisting that she retract my article. I was shocked and horrified. I let all of my feelings take over: rage, embarrassment, self-doubt. But when I looked at what exactly the person was disagreeing with, I realized that he was basically mansplaining on teeny tiny points that were not the main point of the article. Okay. He was basically in disagreement with my main idea, but he wasn't criticizing my main idea. He was trying to silence my message by hooking on to tiny little things that he could disagree with. So thankfully, the editor saw right through his comments, and after checking with me on just a few of them, she didn't even check with me on all of them, printed a small correction. There was an error in my article, so a small correction got printed. But it was really important that the editor and I could both see that what this person was doing was trying to shut down the whole message by disagreeing with one little tiny detail. So how do you deal with silencing, right? What can you do? So like posturing, you need to see through this kind of writing criticism, and good editors help with this. If you let yourself become enraged or beaten down, then the silencer will win. Silencing looks like nitpicking, and for that reason, it can hurt and it can put you on the defensive, right? But once you recognize silencing, you'll see that the person is just grabbing at straws, that the critiques have no basis or are not related to your main point. If your piece has an editor, be sure to get in contact with him or her and call out the silencing. Don't get into an internet fight with the person, be above that and let your work speak for itself. Finally, we get to constructive criticism. Now, constructive criticism is what we want. And if you've ever had the experience of submitting an article and getting back reviews and they have been constructive, it makes your writing better. It might hurt at first a little bit. You might go, ooh, that seems like a lot. But the difference with constructive criticism is once you make that chart, right? Once you make the chart with all the feedback on the left, and then you're getting ready to write your responses to the feedback on the right. Once you've done that, you realize that the person did give you real places to improve, okay? So far, I've talked about two kinds of criticism that you can basically dismiss, right? Posturing and silencing. But let's face it, even though it might hurt, most criticism that you get from reviewers, at least, should be heard and addressed. So let's also admit that sometimes, or maybe most of the time, having your writing's weaknesses revealed is distressing. Okay, maybe really distressing, but this is part of it. And we're going to talk a little bit more about different ways that you can put a barrier between you and those emotions around the criticism. We're going to talk a little bit more about that at the end of this podcast. The review process is there for a reason, and that reason is not to torture you. We are often so close to our own work that we can't take a step back and see it from another perspective. And that is exactly the job of the reviewer, to show us our blind spots, to see connections we didn't see, to call us out before publication so that we aren't called out after. That said, hearing criticism can be overwhelming and sometimes even demoralizing. But here's a mistake too many academics make. They put the reviews away and they give up on the paper. They see the revisions as one enormous project and let themselves just push it down and put it off. But remember, your unique, once only on earth perspective on your field needs to be out there changing the world. So don't let criticism relegate your writing to the drawer. So here is a step-by-step plan for how to deal with writing criticism in the form of reviews. All right, this is going to help you to kind of, you can feel your feelings, but then take action after that. So the first thing to do, there's 7 steps here. So the first step is when you receive the reviews, make sure that you're in the appropriate mental state to open them. All right. So if it's first thing in the morning, a review can totally change your day. So you might not want to respond right away and push all of your scheduled tasks off, or you might need consoling that puts a wrench in your day, right? So you don't have to look right away. So let's imagine you get to work, you do what I say not to do, which is you open your email first thing and you see that you have a decision about your article and you have some reviews there waiting for you. At least take a few breaths before you open that email. Or even better, get out your calendar and schedule an hour when you will look at the reviews, okay? So the big idea here is don't let the reviews derail your day. Of course, they could be great, but they are probably going to have feedback in them. So you probably want to just be in control of yourself when you have a look, okay? Then step 2, so after you've scheduled a time to open that email, step 2 is that once you've opened the reviews, you read them and then wait 24 hours before doing anything. Again, what we're trying to do is quell knee-jerk reactions. We're trying to make it so that when you react, it's not just from an emotional place, but also from a thoughtful place, right? So after that 24 hours, and this is step 3, you read the reviews again, okay? And as you read, you make a list of all the positive things the reviewers said. Yes, you make a list of all the positive things. Because so many times, and please, let me know in the I Should Be Writing Facebook group if you've done this, you open the reviews, they're actually like 70% positive, but the 30% of the review that's a critique just devastates you. So this is a way to make sure that you're hearing the positive comments, all right? So the third step is you read the reviews and you make a list of all the positive things the reviewers said. The fourth step is you read one more time, and this time you make the chart that I was talking about before. The chart is going to have 2 columns and then rows. The first column is the criticism or the feedback. And then the second column is how you plan to address it. And then you just go ahead and copy paste the critique right into that first column and give a row for each item that you need to address. Later, you can actually revise this chart and send it to the editor along with your revision or your resubmission. But you don't have to use this version for that. You can actually make your own notes on this version if you'd like. Step 5 is that now that you have the chart ready, you make a first pass decision about how you'll address the things on the chart. So you identify the things that are easy to change, keeping in mind that sometimes cutting something out is the path of least resistance, right? For more difficult revisions, such as adding additional literature or reanalyzing data or something like that, you should identify those so that they can be put into your calendar. Okay, so this is a way for you to take that chart and create an action plan. When you first see the criticism or when you first do the chart, it might feel like all of the rows on the chart, so each line of criticism or each thing that they're asking you to change, that might feel equally full of work, right? Equally burdensome. But actually, some things are going to be easy to address and some things are going to be more difficult or time consuming. So make sure you go ahead and identify which things are easy and which things you need to plan out and put in your calendar to do. Step 6 is to do all the low-hanging fruit or easy-to-do changes first. That will give you momentum on the project and confidence. And the final step is to schedule out the more time-consuming or difficult revisions, schedule them out on your calendar. So breaking down the revisions into smaller steps helps alleviate feelings of overwhelm and makes sure that you get your revision done. If you have trouble handling writing criticism, I suggest you pick up a copy of the book Playing Big by Tara Moore. We'll link it up in the show notes. It has a really great discussion about disconnecting from both praise and criticism. So I'm going to give you a teaser, tell you a little bit about how Tara Moore talks about that in the book Playing Big, but I do encourage you to pick up a copy and read through it. It is very, very, very helpful. So one of the points that she makes in the book is that feedback doesn't tell you about you. It tells you about the person giving feedback. So one of the ways to disconnect from both praise and criticism is to understand this fact, right? That the criticism and the feedback that you get from people is telling you about them. It's not really necessarily telling you anything about you. And it's certainly not telling you anything about you as a person. So critique on your writing is not a critique of your morality or your personality or your worth to the world. It is simply a critique of a written product, and it often tells you more about the reader than it tells you about your own work. So as you are getting more strategic about how you deal with writing criticism, when you take a good hard look at the feedback that people are giving you, I want you to think about, what does this tell me about the person giving the feedback? What does it reveal about that person? Here's a simple example. I'm a qualitative researcher, and it's very evident to me when an editor sends one of my qualitative pieces out for review by a person who doesn't do qualitative research. And what I get back in terms of feedback and criticism is often like you can see that feedback comes from a completely different epistemology than my work. It's hard and probably useless to try to address feedback that comes from an epistemological difference, right? A difference about how you believe knowledge is made. I mean, you're just not going to convince somebody about that. And it's going to change your work too much. You can't change a qualitative project into a quantitative project. It's just not going to happen. So that can tell you about the reviewer. It can tell you about the journal. It doesn't actually tell you about your work itself. Or what it does tell you about your work is that it's not a good fit for that journal. So that's one example, but really think about and go ahead and pick up. You can also, Google Tara Moore. She has YouTube videos too. Check her out. Disconnecting from that criticism is key. Another thing that she says in the book is that women who play big get criticized, period. And we know this. You're a woman who puts yourself out there, you're going to get critiqued. That's because patriarchy says you're not supposed to be putting yourself out there. You're not supposed to have a voice. You're not supposed to be loud. You're not supposed to be influential. And so by playing big, we open ourselves up to critique. And that is part of the work, but also another reason that we need to really improve the way that we handle critique and criticism. Another aspect of criticism that Tara Moore talks about, she says that criticism hurts more when it mirrors what we believe about ourselves. So in the qualitative research example, if I felt unsure about myself as a qualitative researcher, then those critiques would be more hurtful to me, right? It would be more painful to think about those because they are playing on a belief that I might have about myself, all right? And then one of the things that she also says is disconnecting both from praise and criticism. And you might think like, why do I want to disconnect from praise? You want to disconnect from praise because you don't want to be doing things just for the praise, right? Again, thinking back to your girlhood, maybe you were a girl who enjoyed being the teacher's pet. I know that I definitely put a lot of my identity into being agreeable to the teacher and doing what the teacher said and following the rules. So I would often get praised for that at school, right? Teachers loved to have me in class because I was easy, quote unquote. Well, what's more important to me now than praise such as that is that people take my work and then act on it, that it changes somebody's life. So think about the question, what's more important to you than praise? Well, more important to me than praise is that the work gets out there in the world, that people hear my voice, that my work matters, that it makes a change in other people and makes their lives better. So again, it's worth thinking about how you might disconnect from both praise and criticism. And please pick up a copy of Tara Moore's Playing Big book. I think it is really excellent and will help you if handling writing criticism is one of your big trouble spots. If you're looking for support around your writing, the kind of support that other academic women can give you, then I encourage you to apply for my Amplify Faculty Writing Accelerator program. This is a program specifically for tenure-track women who are pre-tenure. And one of the things that comes up as we do our mastermind calls in that program is how to deal with writing criticism, how to pick yourself back up when you feel like you've been knocked down. And the way that we do that is with good advice and shoulders to cry on and helpful community that will always be there for you. If you're interested in more community, in more support, and in making your tenure journey feel more like inspiration and less like hazing, then you are invited to join the program. You can apply at bit.ly/pre-tenure, and we look forward to talking to you. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time loving on yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join the over 7,000 academic women in the I Should Be Writing Facebook group. Just go to facebook.com/groups/I Should Be Writing or search for I Should Be Writing inside your Facebook app. See you inside.